As I've mentioned in my previous videos, I've been a huge fan of The Witcher books and games since 2007, and I was actually desperate to find someone who I could talk to about it back then. I would talk for hours about it with some of my friends who liked fantasy, and although they seemed interested while we were talking about The Witcher, when I would borrow the books or even audiobooks and also the first game to them, they never picked up any of it. We were also working on the fan Witcher comic book with my cousin who studied illustration at high school at the time, but because he wasn't really into The Witcher and making comic books is really hard and time consuming, we almost immediately stopped after like 3 pages, which I unfortunately can't find anymore. I eventually realized that you can't force it on others, and they can fall in love with something only if they'll find their own way to it, so I gave up on that. There was one guy in my high school who was somewhat of a reenactor, I guess, or he did Hema, Buhurt or something like that, and he also liked The Witcher to some extent. But he was in a different class and we haven't spent that much time together during our studies, so it was more of an acquaintance than friendship, to be honest. But if it weren't for him, I wouldn't know that The Witcher 2 came out. I was that oblivious to the gaming scene. Social media was still pretty young and we were just starting to use Facebook in my country, so there weren't any fan groups online. Maybe there were some discussion forums on some fan websites, but I didn't know any. It was a few years before the release of The Witcher 3 when I discovered this Czech Facebook fan page that was covering news about The Witcher Wild Hunt. I actually got my pre-order for The Witcher 3 Collector's Edition thanks to this page. I had no idea that there's something like collector's editions before this. That's why I don't own any of them for the previous Witcher games, even though I would love to have them. This page was also great because the admin was in contact with the developers from CD Projekt, and he would come up with these competitions where you could win the official Witcher merch. I actually got this t-shirt thanks to this entry, I think. The goal was to merge all 3 Witcher games together in some way, so I took the legendary grandma from The Witcher 1, then the line from The Witcher 2 and Geralt from The Witcher 3 and put them into this precarious situation. But anyway, back to the main topic. I would interact with other Witcher fans on this page, and there was one girl that was almost under every post, so we would often talk with each other through the comment section. The admin of the page invited followers to this convention in Prague because there was a presentation talk about The Witcher. I was just studying graphic design in our capital at the time, so of course I had to be there when it was so close. I've seen my first Witcher cosplay there, which was Ciri, and back then it felt like a big deal because it was before hundreds of people started doing cosplays for the same 4 main characters, and it got old pretty quickly. I met the girl I knew from the Witcher fan page there, and I mustered enough courage to say hi to her and also to the admin of the Facebook page, so that's how I got to know them. This event was in January 2015, and several months later, The Witcher 3 was finally released after so many delays. I think that it was like a day before the release when CD Projekt have put out a launch trailer called A Night to Remember, and I love this one because, as I mentioned in my previous videos, I hate it when Geralt is portrayed as this overpowered badass, because in the books he often struggles in fights, which makes him more relatable, and they showed it in this trailer. Sure, he planned it with the Black Blood potion, but still. This showed me that the developers truly understand the Witcher books and Geralt as a character. The waiting for the game was excruciating. I remember that even before it came out, I had dreams about playing it. I was that hyped for it. Also, do you remember this thank you note from CD Projekt that thanked anyone who bought their game? They used to be so pro-consumer. But anyway, when the game finally came out, it wasn't exactly like in my dreams, but still excellent. Just in different ways. Just the fact that we would finally have much better and free movement like jumping, swimming and riding a horse was a big deal and something I always wanted in The Witcher. Bit of nostalgia at the beginning with Kaer Morhen and then that first ride through White Orchard. Man, it was something else. What I loved was that CD Projekt clearly noticed that they went too overboard with the epic elements of The Witcher 2 and they wanted to capture that down-to-earth atmosphere of Slavic countryside from The Witcher 1 again, which is pretty unique in the fantasy genre, so it's their biggest strength that differentiates them from other generic epic fantasy games. But this time it wasn't this idyllic and peaceful version of the rustic setting, it was war-torn. So you had this blend of the best from both worlds of The Witcher 1 and The Witcher 2, which was the otherwise beautiful countryside with its orchards and windmills, but it was ravaged by war and the military, whose presence you could feel in the nearby ruins of some manor. I really love this location because it's a microcosm of what you can expect from the whole game, and it's obvious that they've put a lot of passion into it. The Witcher 3 is definitely an excellent game. There are still things which you can criticize about it though, but I'll probably do that in some future video because it isn't the main focus of this one. I remember that I was flying through the main story of the game, leaving out most of the side quests, because I didn't want anyone to spoil anything for me. But I finished the side quests afterwards, and I even watched a walkthrough of my favorite Let's Player, Christopher Ott, which was great because I'm not much of a gamer. I play games mainly for the story and atmosphere, and the tutorials provided in the game are insufficient in my opinion, so I didn't know how to use things like the different builds with mutagens on my first playthrough, but I learned it by watching Chris do it himself while explaining what he's thinking. And the same thing happened with Gwent, which is called Gwent in Czech and even the Polish original by the way, so from now on I'll use that.
Actually, you know what? We can beat him with our range because we could wipe out his front and back line at any time.
It was a good thing that I watched that Let's Play and learned how to play Gwent, because almost exactly 1 year after the release of the game, both expansions were released subsequently and the physical copies were sold with 4 main Gwent decks. It was hard to play it with other fans though, when those who owned the decks or knew how to play Gwent were usually far away. You could see some of them online, but that was useless. So naturally it didn't take long until one guy decided to host the first tournament of Gwent in this small pub in Prague, which was again advertised by the admin of that Facebook page I was following. I know exactly when it happened because there is a footage from the event on YouTube with the exact date. And you can see that I was already playing Nilfgaardian deck back then, even though I didn't know where I would end up in the future. People from all over the country who had these decks would come to Prague and play Gwent, drink beer and talk about The Witcher. If it wouldn't be for the unbearable heat, it would have been perfect. The problem was that I exchanged contacts with a few people I've played Gwent with there, but they were from different parts of our country and it would be hard for us to meet again, so I was right at the beginning again. But others who were locals from Prague decided to meet again after just 2 weeks, and then again and again. And that's how Gwent Club started. The guy who organized the first tournament decided that they should do it again, but bigger, with some historical bands and a cosplay contest for people who would want to make their own costumes from The Witcher. It turned into a whole convention in the end, and that's how Blavicon was born. What was great about this event was that while other conventions have sci-fi, fantasy, comic books, anime and other things that don't really merge well all in one space, Blavicon was focused purely on The Witcher, which created this amazing atmosphere thanks to all the people in fantasy costumes and Witcher cosplays, and there were no things that would detract from the atmosphere and take you out of it, like, let's say, some anime character. What's interesting is that the organizers of the event chose Tábor as the location, which is a city founded by the Hussites in the medieval period. The event takes place around Houseův Mlýn, which is kinda dedicated to Hussites and history. So I think it's fitting that there's a convention based on The Witcher, which is by Sapkowski, who also wrote a series of books about the Hussites. For my first year, I asked my mom if she would help me make a costume of a merchant from The Witcher 3. It looks really bad when I look at it now, but that's my fault, because I had no idea how these things should be made back then. And I actually want to give props to my mom, because she made part of the costume I wanted from her exactly how I told her to make it, and she had like a week for it. I knew that most people at the convention will have either cosplay of main characters or some favorite side characters, and I didn't want to cosplay a character someone else would probably do. I wanted my own thing. That's why I decided to do the merchant, because I thought that nobody would probably be so crazy to cosplay only as some NPC. People actually thought that I'm Talar, and I didn't really want to explain that no, I'm just a random merchant. But this mentality would shape even my future decisions regarding choosing my other costumes from the world of The Witcher. And I have to say it paid off immediately, because there were several Geralts at the first Blavicon. But there were pretty cool costumes overall, and I really loved some of them, like Toruviel, you probably know that I have a weak spot for The Witcher 1, or this Succubus, and many others. I don't want to shit on anyone, because these were still early days in the fandom and almost everybody was new to it, so having several different Geralts was kinda inevitable, and a lot of them eventually became my friends who do really cool stuff nowadays, but more on that later. I want to briefly go through the other years of Blavicon. I went with the same costume again for the second year. The event was a bit more developed because it started to also have a story essentially. There were story scenes on stage and some hints of LARP elements were introduced. The whole event was essentially about the kings gathering for a meeting to discuss what they'll do with Nilfgaard that is trying to provoke the Northern Realms to start a war with them. It ended with Nilfgaard entering the stage, which was pretty epic, and it was the first time I saw the Nazir Brigade. My friend Moritz and a few other people started this LARP group independently from Blavicon, and when there was this big Witcher event, they attended it as well. That's what's great about these Witcher events, they brought all kinds of Witcher fans and their projects together, and all the different groups created the Czech Witcher community, which is probably the most dedicated in the whole world from what I've seen. The third Blavicon was called Shadows over Skellige, so the theme was pretty self-explanatory. For this one, I had to make an impression. You see, while I was attending Blavicon every year and I met a lot of other fans of The Witcher, none of them really became my friends. But I really wanted to belong in this group of crazy people who love The Witcher as much as I do. For a while I had a feeling that I sort of missed my train with that, even though I was in the community from the beginning, and that's because after the first Gwent tournament people continued to meet every 2 weeks, and I didn't, because I wasn't in Prague that summer since I was at college there and we had summer holiday. When my semester started and I got back to Prague, I didn't really feel like going to Gwent Club because I wasn't sure if I would know anyone there. I've seen some of the people I met at that first Gwent tournament at the first Blavicon again, but the problem was that they seemed to have a pretty tight friend group already from all the meetings in Gwent Club that I wasn't at. And as a very introverted and socially awkward guy, I just didn't know how to approach any of them without getting into some cringy situation. And this is how it continued for years. After the first Blavicon, I tried to start going to Gwent Club again, but I was just sitting there awkwardly sipping beer between other people who were having a blast, while I was listening to them and having no idea what to say. I would sometimes see some newcomers who were there for the first time and immediately integrated seamlessly, so I would always wonder how come it's so easy for them. I should also mention that somewhere between Blavicon 2018 and 2019 I started chatting with this girl Nyx on Facebook who was also at Blavicon 1 year. We went for a coffee and I told her that I want to make videos about fantasy, castles and stuff like that, as I've mentioned in one of my recent videos. It intrigued her because she was organizing a LARP set in the world of The Witcher and she wanted me to make a trailer for it. And that's how we both met the Mayana Commando. They offered us that we could join their LARP group if we would want to, but I'm not much of an elf, so I passed, but Nyx eventually joined them and she's a member to this day. We would start going to Gwent Club together with Nyx, and that's where she introduced me to her friend Dan. The funny thing is that he later became one of my best friends in the Witcher fan community, and I started hanging out with him way more. Bros before hoes, am I right boys? I'm just joking Nyx, please don't kill me next time you see me. As you can see, things started to sort of turn to my favor thanks to these awesome people, but I still didn't know Dan that well at the time. Nix just introduced us, but that was it. I still wasn't part of any friend group in the community, and the next Blavicon was approaching. That's why I decided to go all out for the Blavicon 2019. I noticed during previous years that cosplayers usually stick together and it's easy for them to become friends because they belong to the same group of weirdos and they have a lot to talk about. So I decided that I'll do cosplay of an NPC again, but this time I'll put way more money and effort into it and I'll choose something a bit cooler than a merchant, which was Uncrate Warrior since the theme was Skellige. I got horns from a ram skull and I took my design of a helmet with the horns to a blacksmith who made it for me. I also had this embroidery made and there were other little details on the costume. What pissed me off a bit was that the blacksmith made the helmet really shiny, so it looked like chrome, even though I specifically told him that I don't want that because I hate shiny armor. I got some cool pictures from the convention, I've met Dan there again and I really enjoyed partying in front of the stage. I even had a chance to jump on stage with other cosplayers in front of Percival for the main concert. But my plan of fitting in with the Czech Witcher fandom by making a cool costume didn't really pan out because I haven't really made any friends at Blavicon that year. And I was getting pretty depressed after that because I've poured my soul into it and nothing really happened. Or that's what I thought at the time, but what actually happened was that some important people noticed me for the first time. One of them was my friend Moritz, who told me that the costume isn't great, which I very much agree with nowadays, but he liked the silhouette, which was important according to him because he said that the different soldiers of the Witcher world should be recognizable just by looking at their distinctive silhouette. The other guy who noticed me was my friend Selen, and because he liked my costume, he invited me to Blavburg. I haven't mentioned it yet, but in between Blavicons there were smaller events like Blarp, which was a LARP organized by Gwent Club, or Blavburg, which was essentially a weekend photoshoot for cosplayers. I didn't really know anyone who would go to Blavburg, but I said to myself that if I want to fit in, I have to take a chance and go to every other event beside Blavicon even by myself, because there's not so many people there and the core of the community is probably created by people who come to these smaller events. And it was the right decision, because I've met my friend Eltien from the Mayana Commando there, and especially Dan, Moritz and the Nazir Brigade. We had a photoshoot together and Dan with a few other people have become really good friends of mine during this Blavburg. They actually invited me to their LARP called Rudobor, which was only a week after that. I enjoyed it so much that this is how I ended up there. We went to many more events together and my fate was already sealed. I've joined the Nazir Brigade and become a Nilfgaardian. It wasn't really because I liked Nilfgaard or anything. I liked that the Nazir Brigade had really good costumes and armors, which I'll explain more in a future video dedicated just to this LARP group. What I liked was that they were also doing way more than just going to events. Their role as Nilfgaardians didn't end after the event like it is with many other groups. They were still doing really interesting stuff day to day and worked on their group relentlessly at home. But most importantly, they were the friend group I always wanted. I finally found it. I offered them that I can do graphic design and make videos for them, which we got to during the next few years. I eventually also joined the Witcher Stories team thanks to my friend Selen, also as a graphic designer, so my free time was split between work for Nazir Brigade, Moritz Workshop and the Witcher Stories. And I wasn't just a fan of The Witcher anymore. It was more like a lifestyle for me at that point and I loved it. The only reason I had to cut down on it is that I still wanted to create my own YouTube channel and videos, and that takes time. Then COVID hit and Blavicon 2020 was cancelled, which was a shame because Nilfgaard played a big role in it. The Czech fan community saved the event eventually, but after it happened in 2022, there have been some disagreements in the organizer team and they've since split up. My friend Selen formed his own team and they had to start the event from scratch under the name Con Morhen, which will be this week, and I'm going there immediately after I finish this video. I would like to explain an important lesson I've learned throughout these years in the community. If you are introverted and socially awkward as I am, but you want to fit in some group, you just need to get out of your comfort zone and go to everything that's organized by the community you want to belong to, and the best way to integrate is to offer them some help. If you are helping before, after or at the event, you'll come into contact with all kinds of people you haven't met before, and when you are working with others, they have to communicate with you. There's no segregation into already established friend groups. There's no time for that because the work needs to be done fast. So that's how you can break the ice. It's really simple, just be everywhere and be helpful. Everybody likes that. Here at the end, I would like to mention at least some people who helped me fit in with this awesome community. I want to thank Nix, Dan, Moritz, Selen, everybody from the Nazir Brigade and all our friends from the community. There's too many people, so I apologize for not mentioning you by name. Even though this community is getting older every year, people come and go and we bicker sometimes, I still love you all and I'm proud that I can be part of this. See you at Con Morhen or other events this year.